a promise of kings, we're going to look at David and the covenant of David. And as we see, the story is inching closer and closer to Jesus. And with David, of course, the promise is a promise of kingship. God is entering into covenant with David, and he's saying, again, we see those I will statements. I'm going to give you a seed. I'm going to make sure that there's someone on your throne. And so the idea of the covenant with David is the promise of kings. And it's interesting because when we get to David and this covenant of kingship, the authority that's going to rule the great nation in the land, you can see that progressive building in the story. What's interesting is the promise of kings goes all the way back to Abraham. We see Abraham promised kings are going to come from Sarah. And we see the promise of kings in the Mosaic covenant and how the kings of Israel were to abide by the statutes and the commandments of the law if they were to be a good king, if they were to not oppress their people. And so we see that with David, the kind of king David is. Of course, in his Psalms, again and again, we see this beautiful relationship that God has with David as before he's king and as king. And we see these characteristics of trusting and obeying God in the life of David. And in so many of his beautiful Psalms, we see this same thing where David celebrates the law of the Lord in Psalms 1 and 19 and 119. But we also see, like in Psalms 32 and Psalms 51, this deep, repentant, confessional nature where David cries out in his sin for forgiveness. And so we see in David this promise of kings, and we can't help but see in him this the coming new covenant and Jesus who's going to sit on David's throne, who's the promised forever one, if you will, this son who's going to sit on his throne forever. And so this is a great lesson in seeing how these covenants of promise are tied in, going from God has made a promise to keep creation, concern and care for creation in Noah, this promise to bless creation through Abraham, this promise that he's going to have a holy nation, and through that holy nation, the nations will see what God's people look like. And David is this king, this promise of a king that's going to set up a kingdom that's going to rule forever. And so by the time we get to David, this fourth covenant of promise, we can just almost taste Jesus right around the corner because all these promises are stacking up and pointing towards him.